When you suddenly find yourself under mortal threat, you've got to respond with what you actually have now. Frankly, the insurance premium on our US alliance relationship has just been increased very substantially. And if we want the alliance relationship to endure, we've got to pay the higher premium. And that means a big increase in defence spending and ultimately a very substantial increase in defence capability.
2025 is a year of change. Cultural and political disruption is transforming our nation and the global order. The rebellion against the establishment has accelerated. Australia and the Western Alliance is now at a crossroads. Either the mainstream will continue its ascendancy or the elites will prevail.
Hello Tony, and g'day to all of our viewers and listeners. Great to be back for another episode of Australia's Future. Today we'll be talking about Tony's assessment of the future of the Liberal Party, the latest developments in the net zero debate, and the US asking Australia to lift our defence payments and expenditure. Tony, great to be back with you.
Dan, it's wonderful to be back here with you. I had a lovely interlude with John Roscombe, but you're the original and the best. And
the OG.
Yeah. And look, well, what can I say? You put up a great fight in Spence. You deserved better, but I think you were let down by a very poor national campaign.
No, thanks, Tony. And I should say you came out with me for a day and a half in Spence across the electorate, and you were very well received, and I think that gave a boost to my campaign. So thanks for coming out, and look, it was a good experience.
I reckon that there's something uplifting about grassroots democracy. Whether you win or lose, it forces you to go out and talk to a lot of Australians, and whether they're left or right, whoever they vote for, the vast majority of people are decent people, and I think that it's a very good thing that democracy makes would-be members of parliament actually get out there and talk to the people they seek to represent.
Yep, no, absolutely. It was a very educative experience. We might be able to chat about that as we go along.
Yeah.
But to kick off with, let's chat about the developments with the US and the US Defence Secretary shirt-fronting, if you like, Richard Marles, his counterpart here in Australia, to imploring Australia to increase our defence spending to at least 3.5% of GDP. Tony, your assessment on this matter?
Well, Dan, leaders on both sides of politics have been saying for the best part of 5 years or more that these are the most perilous strategic times since the late 1930s, but our actions have not really reflected our words. We are still limping along at barely 2% of spending on the military. In fact, we're weakening the military now so that it might be stronger in 10 years' time when these AUKUS subs finally turn up. And frankly, given that the world is getting more dangerous by the day, it's just not good enough. Now, I've just come back from Ukraine. Obviously, Ukraine's had some signal successes over the last few days, some surprising successes against its relentless enemy, but we just don't know when a very serious military contingency could arise. The Ukrainians had a couple of months warning, I suppose, of Putin's full-scale attack in February. When you suddenly find yourself under mortal threat, you've got to respond with what you actually have now, not what you might hope to have in 5 or 10 years' time. So understanding that the wider world is more dangerous, understanding that Australia's interests are global, not just regional and local, understanding that if democracy is badly damaged anywhere, it's diminished everywhere, we need to be much more ready than we currently are. Frankly, the insurance premium on our US alliance relationship has just been increased very substantially. And if we want the alliance relationship to endure, we've got to pay the higher premium. And that means a big increase in defence spending and ultimately a very substantial increase in defence capability.
And just on that second point, I guess it's not just about the spending per se, because we could really increase our spending by a lot and be spending it on the wrong things in an inefficient manner, which seems to be the case. Everything seems to take forever. Everything seems to get delayed. Everything seems to have blowouts. What are the kinds of things you think we should be spending that money on to be more prepared for the future?
Well, one of the things that we really need to be doing is paying a lot of attention to the lessons of the war in Ukraine. And drones are becoming the king of the battlefield. Now, that doesn't mean that all we need are drones, but nevertheless, we certainly do need a lot more unmanned autonomous vehicles, both in the air and on the sea. And in so many respects, the Ukrainians probably have more to teach us about warfare right now than we have to teach them, even though it's actually Australian trainers who are helping the Ukrainian infantry work themselves up in Britain right now. So we obviously have to get far more unmanned weaponry. We need to get much greater volume of weaponry. It's better to have thousands and thousands of cheap things than a couple of dozen expensive things, because the lesson of Ukraine is you go through these items of kit at an extraordinary rate. But essentially, we need more offensive and defensive missile systems. We need to harden all of our bases in Northern Australia, and we need to be talking with our allies and partners about how we can contribute to the most realistic defence emergency that we could face. And that's obviously some Beijing assault on Taiwan. The commissars in Beijing have been telling us for years that they are determined to take Taiwan by force if necessary. The Americans have been telling us for quite some time now that they think the Chinese will be ready to mount a major assault on Taiwan by 2027, which is just 18 months away. We need to be thinking of the various contingencies, starting with a blockade and what we might do to respond. But even before it gets to that, what you've got to hope that every morning Xi Jinping wakes up, thinks about Taiwan and says, not today. And the best way to ensure that the commissars in Beijing keep saying, not today, is if they are confident that any assault on Taiwan would not just pit 1.4 billion Chinese against 25 million Taiwanese, but it would pit China against the world, or at least China against a strong partnership of democracies. And so if we can say to our American friends, to our Japanese friends, well, we are part of the preservation of decency and democracy in East Asia, I think that would be a very important signal to Beijing that Taiwan is not alone.
Well, I wanted to move on now to an article that you wrote recently for the Australian newspaper, where you gave your assessment of basically what went wrong for the Liberals at the election and where to from here. I just wanted to read out a particular part of it that I thought was quite important. You wrote that the coalition needs to level with voters about our country's predicaments and not shy away from pointing out all of the indicators of our long-term decline, and that Australians sense that our country is drifting backwards and will eventually acknowledge leaders who are straight with them about our challenges and their potential solutions as well. So, Tony, you had a number of, I guess, specific suggestions contained within that article as well. So perhaps you could elaborate on your assessment of I guess, that point about, the broader challenge facing the Liberal Party today.
Well, the party has got to address our national issues, and the key national issues are economic stagnation, social fracturing, and strategic peril. Now, we've spoken a bit about the strategic peril. Let's look at the economic stagnation, and then let's look at the social fracturing. Now, Our real standard of living has been dropping, we think by about 8% over the last 3 years. Certainly GDP per head has been dropping for the last 2 years in succession. The fundamental problem is that we are deliberately damaging ourselves with certain governmental policies. Now, energy is obviously one, because for the last decade and a half, with the exception of the Abbott government period where we abolished the carbon tax, we've been running our electricity system to reduce emissions rather than produce affordable and reliable power. So that has really got to end. I mean, I take it that we've only got one planet and we can't be cavalier with it, but nevertheless, this emissions obsession is A, futile, because others are not equally obsessed, and it's B, damaging because our power prices are now something like double power prices in the United States, and electricity is the economy. Energy security is national security. So, frankly, we, on the conservative side of politics, should have been saying right up till polling day, unmistakably, that we're on about affordable, reliable power. That means A, no coal-fired power stations to close, B, rapid extraction of gas at an absolutely breakneck speed, C, no subsidies for new renewables because if they really are cheap, they don't need subsidies, and D, an end of the nuclear ban. Now, regrettably, the brave thing that we promised pre-election to end the nuclear ban was of itself not only a part of an energy policy, not a comprehensive energy policy, but it was hardly prosecuted during the campaign. Then, of course, there's all of these pro-union measures which are damaging productivity and making it harder to run businesses. So there's the economic stagnation that we have to have serious answers about. Then there's the social fracturing. Well, obviously, we've seen this explosion in Jew hatred over the last 18 months or so since the October 7 atrocity. But this is symptomatic of a failure by officialdom generally over a long period of time to stress our nation's unity over its diversity. Now, I absolutely accept, Dan, that we are an immigrant nation, always have been since 1788, I'm sure always will be, but migrants coming to Australia have a duty first to integrate and ultimately to assimilate. And the problem with this whole multiculturalism exercise that we've been engaged in over the last couple of generations really is that it has tended to encourage separatism. It has tended to encourage people to think of themselves as residents in Hotel Australia rather than as members of Team Australia. And I'm, as I said, in favour of migration. I am myself a migrant. 30% of us are overseas born. Something like 50% of us are either overseas born or have one parent overseas born. But in the end, there are Australian values that all of us have got to subscribe to. As the Citizenship Act says, or the pledge says, from this time forward under God, I pledge my allegiance to Australia and its people. And here's the critical lines: whose democratic beliefs I share, whose rights and liberties I respect, whose laws I will uphold and obey. And as we've seen, most notably with these Jew hatred marches and protests and demonstrations over the last 18 months, I don't think a significant slice of our more recent migrants have taken that as seriously as they should have.
What is it that you think can be done about those who are currently here? And I think, one of the concerns that I have is, a number of those who are participating in those marches are actually citizens of Australia. I guess if they're residents, then measures can be taken. But if you're a citizen, then you're sort of at the next level. And that's what we've seen in the UK, where a lot of people participating in this behaviour are citizens of the UK. So what do you think can be done on that count?
Well, one of the crazy things is the double standards that we have. For instance, just imagine if the protesters, that angry mob outside the Opera House on October the 9th, a couple of days after the atrocity in Israel, imagine if they'd been saying F the Aborigines or something like that, as opposed to F the Jews. Do you think the book wouldn't have been thrown at them? Of course the book would have been thrown at them. But for some reason, because some groups in this crazy upside-down world are regarded as having more rights and more merits than others, we pussyfooted around about all that stuff. So if we are going to have all of this anti-discrimination law, and in particular these anti-discrimination human rights activist bureaucracies, they've got to be even-handed. And they've got to be even-handed under a governmental and official structure that says, at the end of the day, we are one people under one flag, operating under one law, where all of us are equal in rights and dignity, whether our ancestors have been in this country for 60,000 years, or whether we're just the newest of new citizens, we are all equally Australian, and we've all got to operate by Australian law and, as far as we humanly can, Australian values.
Just picking up on one of the points around net zero, in addition to everything that you've said, I'm just bamboozled by the fact that it remains Liberal Party policy. I mean, you've outlined the economic and social damage, but it's also just incompatible with Liberal values. It's a tax on working Australians through higher energy prices. It hands over massive power to unelected bureaucrats over the cars we can drive, the food we can eat, the houses we can live in, the jobs we can have. As you outlined, it's weakening our national security and it's infecting our education system and indoctrinating children. How can this remain? I mean, we've had 2 elections where the Liberals have taken this to the people and we've been smashed in both, including by the very voters that we were told it was supposed to win over. I just don't understand why it's still Liberal Party policy.
The interesting fact, electoral fact, Dan, is that in those elections where the Coalition and the ALP have been significantly at odds on energy and climate, the Coalition's done well. On those elections where, at least where net zero and climate are concerned, we've Me Too'd each other, the Coalition has done badly. In 2010, when I kept saying that as sure as night follows day, if Labor gets elected, there'll be a carbon tax. We picked up seats when we weren't expected to. 2013, when we were campaigning against the carbon tax that did in fact eventuate, we had a smashing victory. In 2019, when Scott Morrison and in particular Matt Canavan campaigned against Labor's then 45% emissions reduction target, we had a miracle win. So the lesson of the past is where we treat climate and energy as an economic issue, we do well. Where we accept that it's some kind of a moral issue, we do badly. And the problem with this whole net zero approach is that it's become a theological objective and it's getting in the way of practical benefits for the Australian people. Now, my view about net zero is, yes, let's do our best to reduce emissions, but never, ever at the cost of jobs, of driving in industries offshore, or of damaging people's standard of living. And plainly, that's exactly what we've done. So I think net zero needs to be a long-term aspiration, not a hard and fast objective which we somehow must achieve by any particular date and so much else needs to be subordinated to it. No. I mean, it's far more important to have a better life today and tomorrow than it is to fret over a speculative outcome in 8 elections' time. I mean, this is the craziness about this. Net zero in 2050 is 8 elections away. So much can happen in that time.
Yeah, that's right. One of the things I noticed as a candidate was the importance of authenticity. And what I sensed was voters were not necessarily primarily concerned with whether they agreed with you or not on a particular issue, but they wanted to know whether you were fair dinkum with them or not. And I think that we, as Liberals, were penalised heavily because people knew we weren't legitimate. On things like net zero, I don't believe in it. I don't think very many people in the Liberal Party believe in it. So why pretend that we do? Much better off establishing your values and making the case to people. At least they'll respect you for being legitimate and honest with them. And I think we're going through an authenticity crisis within the party where, for whatever reason, many no longer know what they believe. They're driven by focus groups and polling. They regurgitate what they're told to say in the media, and people see through that very, very quickly. So,
and we hedge our bets, that's the problem. And if you hedge your bets, people don't take you seriously. Now, look, you're dead right. I mean, one of the real weirdnesses about this whole net zero push is the rampant environmental destruction in the name of saving the planet that is involved in the massive additional rollout of these wind turbines and solar panels and transmission lines everywhere. I mean, forests of wind turbines, carpets and carpets and carpets of solar panels, transmission towers marching through hitherto pristine wilderness. I reckon these wind turbines are the satanic mills of the modern era, and what we need is not more wind turbines, particularly offshore wind turbines. What we need is dense energy that can give us the much greater supplies of electricity that we are going to need as part of the AI revolution. We're certainly going to need far more electricity, and it's got to be the electricity which is provided by dense sources, fossil fuels now and down the track, preferably as soon as possible, nuclear energy.
One question I want to ask, Tony, and we'll move on to our last topic, was just about this idea of, the Liberal Party as a broad church. And I sort of wonder, when John Howard discussed that in the 90s, that there was sort of a unifying set of principles within the Liberal Party. There was a sort of a shared common purpose. And I think the community as a whole was much more homogenous than what it is now. I sort of wonder whether that era is now finished. When you look at how disparate, for example, voters in Kooyong are, for instance, compared to voters in Elizabeth, where I campaigned. Their lived experience is incredibly different, and they might as well be living on different planets, in my assessment. And I do wonder whether that conceptualisation of the Liberal Party, which worked for a very long time, I do wonder whether that holds in today's environment, or whether we're heading more towards a European type situation of many smaller parties. This is something that I'm thinking about, and just interested in your thoughts as well on that.
Well, Dan, I wouldn't want us to face a European situation, because all of the difficulties that we've got in this country, I think, are worse in Europe. And a European polity is more likely to give you a European result than it is to produce a better outcome here in Australia. I think that a strong two-party system produces better government than the kind of constant coalitions of very different parties that we see in most of continental Europe. So I want to fix our system rather than transition to a European system. I accept, Dan, that society has evolved over the last generation, not always in positive directions. But I think the real problem is not the failure of the Liberal Party, for argument's sake, to reflect evolution in society. I think the bigger problem is essentially a failure of leadership. And stronger leadership produces better political parties, and ultimately it produces better government. And the circumstances matter. I mean, John Howard was a very effective Prime Minister because in the end he had a strong and mostly united team. I think the Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison era was perhaps more blighted than it should have been because of the revolving door prime ministership and the fact that there were one or two individuals, or maybe several key individuals, who really weren't team players at all. It was kind of every man and woman for themselves at times. So I don't think the problem is fundamentally structural. I think the problem is fundamentally personal. I think it's fundamentally the character and capability, the courage and the conviction of the individuals. And I think that if we had more people of courage and conviction on both sides of the fence, I've got to say, if we had more Bob Hawkes and Paul Keatings on the other side, just as if we had more John Howards and Peter Costellos on our side, I think we could have just as good outcomes as we did in that long quarter century of pretty good government.
Just to end on a topic relating to personalities, the Moira Deeming, John Pesutto saga continues with John Pesutto now being told he must pay up, now facing the prospect of potentially bankruptcy if he's unable to make those payments, and that would then trigger a by-election in his seat of Hawthorn, which I think the Liberals would probably lose, although it's unclear. There's been interventions by those such as Jeff Kennett, who are imploring party members and others to essentially support John Pesutto in finding that money. I'm just interested in your thoughts of where this currently stands and what you think the right way to go is in terms of, ideally being able to resolve this matter.
Well, at a human level, I have a degree of sympathy for Pesutto, who put himself forward for public leadership, took on the difficult job of state opposition leader, did what he thought was the right thing, and now finds himself in difficult circumstances. The truth is, he should never have defamed Moira Deeming. Having defamed her, he should never have persisted in a court case that he must have known he could disastrously lose. Now, I don't want to see him driven out of the parliament. I just think all of those people who were loudly encouraging Pesutto to persist in what was always a disastrous course of expelling from the Liberal Party a good and decent woman who was standing up for reasonable liberal beliefs. It was always a disastrous course, and the people who encouraged John Pesutto to persist really now should help him out so that he can avoid bankruptcy. Simple as that. The party shouldn't pay. The people who supported him should pay.
Just to finish this off, I think it was clear that one of the reasons why I think the Liberal leadership decided to pursue Moira Deeming in the way that they did was because they were intimidated by Daniel Andrews and the Labor Party, and if they were seen to have been standing up for Moira and defending her, they would have been tarnished as Nazi or Nazi sympathisers, which of course was always pathetic and ridiculous. And I think the court documents established as such. Doesn't this reinforce the critical need to take the fight to your political opponent and not bend the knee to them and not base your decisions on what you think they might say about you? Because this whole thing would have been avoided if they had said, we're standing up for Moira, and where, Daniel Andrews can say whatever he wants about it.
And perhaps also there was, if you like, a degree of condescension by Liberals of the leafy areas towards Liberals of Struggle Street. And yet the truth is that at its best, the Liberal Party is the party that stands up for Struggle Street. We're not the party of the privileged. We're the party of the people who want to have a go. And I reckon Moira Deeming absolutely represents all those people in this country who want to have a go. And quite apart from her position on the rights of women and girls to their own safe spaces, I think that if we really are to be the natural party of government that I think we should be, we need to be on the side of people like Moira.
All right, Tony. Well, it's great to be back having a chat with you, and looking forward to another fortnight or so when we'll catch up again.
Me too.
This is a production of the Centre for the Australian Way of Life at the Institute of Public Affairs. To find out more, visit australia.ipa.org.au.